Hello, and welcome to How an Industry Leader Accelerates Data Insights Using DevOps and Serverless. My name is Santiago Cardenas, and I'm a Senior Partner Solutions Architect and Global Technical Lead for Serverless Partners at AWS, and I will be your host and moderator for today's webinar. I'm joined by James Jimorginas, who is a Practice Area Lead in Software Engineering at Slalom. He has worked closely with our other guests, Chris Beagle, Director of Software Engineering, and Joseph Pippin, Infrastructure Architect at Airlines Reporting Corporation, also known as ARC. In this webinar, you will learn how serverless technologies enable development teams to focus on creating business value instead of managing infrastructure, how containers enable more complex data processing in a reliable, repeatable, and predictable fashion, how a data lake built on Amazon S3 provides scale and high availability, and finally, how modern cloud-native architectures enables you to increase capacity as your business scale. In today's business environment, and in order to achieve agility, leading companies favor experimentation over elaborate planning, customer feedback over intuition, and iterative design over traditional waterfall development with enormous design upfront. This drives innovation, and innovation and competition result in product improvements, usefulness, and increased usage. Shifting resources from operations to development teams means that developers can experiment more and in turn bring new ideas to market faster. As they collect and analyze customer feedback, those learnings can inspire new experiments. The goal here for innovators is to keep this flywheel turning as fast as possible. It's also evident that software system architectures are evolving, and we see that every day when we talk to our customers. Monolithic applications try to do everything and are tightly coupled. This leads to fragile software that scales very rigidly and requires over-provisioning to handle increased loads. If you need to release a small change, you may find yourself having to rebuild or recompile the entire application and run the entire test suite to make sure that there are no regressions. Now, if all the tests pass, then you find yourself having to redeploy the entire application. The evolution here normally centers around separating and decoupling the monolith into smaller minimal function services, or microservices, that focus on one thing and do it well. Each microservice often has its own data store and can be deployed and scaled independently. They represent the real world where service boundaries equal business boundaries. This also leads to an evolution of the teams by giving them the autonomy to architect, develop, deploy, and maintain each microservice. DevOps principles also fit nicely with automated pipelines and developers owning the production support. And cloud-native microservices then take advantage of the cloud for elasticity, platform, and software services. Finally, you end up with the ability to make decisions really quickly because decisions only impact individual services. After all, innovation requires change. You can learn faster by making lots of little changes to drive incremental innovation rather than waiting to take one big leap. Now, when it comes to the development lifecycle of monolithic application, it often leaves a lot to be desired. With monolith being composed of multiple tightly coupled services, more often than not, multiple teams are working together to deliver features and fixes while keeping the systems operational. A single delivery pipeline, if one exists, is used for the building, testing, and releasing of new versions and updates. To improve this process and become more agile and increase velocity, we can reorganize the development teams into small autonomous teams based on the different domains covered by the microservices or the services themselves. Taking this a step further and allowing these teams to run what they build, they can then focus on innovation. This can be the next hot thing, incremental value to customers, or continuous improvement. Independent delivery pipelines accompany these new microservices to allow for single service deployments. If you're familiar with the AWS cloud, you've likely heard us talk about shared responsibility. In short, a shared responsibility model implies that there are parts of the system that AWS is responsible for, and there are parts of the system that you as a customer must take responsibility for. All in all, AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. Those are things like hardware, software, networking, and facilities that run AWS cloud services, while the customer is responsible for security in the cloud. Things like the guest operating systems, which include updates and security patches, application software monitoring, and security, configuration of firewalls, managing their data, and applying the appropriate permissions. Now, when it comes to operational responsibility, it is a spectrum. On one side of the spectrum, you can leverage the power and flexibility of Amazon EC2 to run your own database, or use Amazon RDS to simplify the management of the database. Alternatively, you can move to a fully managed database like Amazon DynamoDB, where you create tables, put data in those tables, and can query it on demand, all with no infrastructure to manage. So we ask ourselves, how can we continue evolving to further reduce the undifferentiated heavy lifting so that our customers can focus on innovating on business problems? And that's where serverless can help. Serverless is an operational model. When we say serverless, we mean that it's the removal of the undifferentiated heavy lifting that is server operations. This is an important distinction for customers because it allows customers to focus on the building of the applications rather than the management and scaling of the infrastructure to support the applications. This means not thinking about infrastructure provisioning, operating, patching, or scaling. It also means that you pay for what you value, like consistent throughput or execution duration, rather than server units, and all with high availability and security built in. Many customers think about serverless and Lambda together a lot, but serverless is a lot more than AWS Lambda. Compute services can and have been commoditized. Just look at Amazon EC2. AWS led the way with AWS Lambda, but there are other serverless compute services available today. For example, AWS Fargate allows you to run containerized workloads without worrying or having to scale the underlying cluster nodes. While AWS Lambda and AWS Fargate offer many key advantages for our customers, it's really when all these other components surround them that we start to see much bigger benefits. Messaging, workflows, storage, and compute together are the secret sauce. In fact, it's really when all of these components come together that we really start to see the big gains. In terms of use cases, we see customers adopting serverless for a wide range of architectures. This can be from simple static websites to complex dynamic applications or backends with extensive business workflows to data processing workloads like Arc's serverless data lake, which we'll hear a little bit more later on in the webinar. We also see customers making use of serverless technologies to power chatbots and Alexa skills. Lastly, IT teams take advantage of using serverless to manage, monitor, and schedule tasks in legacy workloads. In the end, serverless enables you with greater agility, allowing you to iterate quickly and adapt to changes, less overhead by not having to manage the underlying infrastructure and servers, better focus on business logic and workflows, increased scale with usage that scales up and down on demand, more flexibility to design your architectural components and integrate with specialized services, and overall faster time to market. Now I'd like to hand it over to James to tell us about Slalom.
Thanks, Santiago. It's great to be here today. I'm excited to share more about Slalom, our close partnership with AWS, and our collaboration with Arc over the last 18 months. As the numbers on the right highlight, Slalom brings deep expertise across a range of AWS competencies. The numbers change frequently, but our focus on bringing the best that AWS offers to our clients is constant. For our work with Arc, we leveraged our expertise across several competencies, including DevOps, data and analytics, and financial services, in order to support a major technology-driven digital transformation. Let's dive in. To start, I'd like to share a bit more about Slalom. Slalom is a modern consulting firm focused on strategy, technology, and business transformation. We're traditionally known for our local market model. Simply put, that means we work where we live. And because we work where we live, we have a vested interest in our clients' success. The local model resonates with our clients and has fueled our growth to more than 8,000 people across over 30 markets. Our growth has also been enabled by our onshore technology delivery capability. We have over a decade of experience supporting scaled digital transformations with cross-functional teams working from our onshore build centers. We work in common time zones with our clients, allowing us to co-create with them. With 10 build centers and over 1,000 Slalom builders, we're able to bring high-performing product delivery teams to our clients at any scale. It's also worth highlighting that our onshore delivery model and proficiency with remote delivery has allowed us to continue our work with ARC without interruption over the last few challenging months. Our product delivery focus stems from a recognition that, as Andy Jassy captured, we're in the beginning of a massive tech revolution. Every company is becoming a technology company. As companies make that transition, they're facing some similar challenges. One challenge is access to technology talent being tighter than ever. Companies are being asked to do more with less. Another challenge is competitive pressures that have increased and accelerated. Companies are being asked to do more before others do it first. A third challenge is advancement in technology that are outpacing the abilities of organizations to adapt. Companies want to lower their cost of change and increase their business agility as a result. To address these common challenges, companies are looking for a new kind of partner to support them on their technical journeys. To be that partner, we try to excel across these 10 dimensions. They're all important, but I want to highlight a few that have been indispensable during our journey with ARC. Communicating effectively has been fundamental to our scaled co-creation with ARC over the last year and a half. Consider the diagram Santiago shared earlier and how communication channels must evolve as we move from a monolith to microservices. Making connections is also important. Our deep partnership with AWS allows us to accelerate our clients' digital journeys using world-class building blocks as we've done with ARC. Bringing more is something we strive to do. Our lead for the ARC engagement, Usama Bagili, frequently challenges us to bring the best of Slalom to our clients. Bringing our absolute best is a high bar, but it's what our clients expect. Last but not least is aligning on values. Values help all of us at Slalom stay aligned across markets and build centers. We pride ourselves on focusing on our people, and it was apparent very early on that ARC does the same. Let me take you back to an early meeting with ARC at Slalom's headquarters in Seattle. Dickie Oliver, ARC's CIO, kicked off our session by sharing his vision for the future. He talked about challenging the status quo, about finding new solutions to challenging problems. He talked about the value of ARC's people to their organization and a renewed focus on continuous learning. That message resonated. The combination of disruption, of technology as a means to deliver business value quickly, of personal and organizational growth, and an excitement about the future is very much in line with our values at Slalom. In fact, it's a very similar set of values that inspired the build as a service model we've leveraged extensively at ARC. It's a model made up of 5 key ingredients. The first is proximity in our onshore build centers. We believe that building modern software products requires proximity to our clients and our technology cohorts. Build centers are located in our clients' time zones. At ARC, we've met in person whenever it's been needed, but we've been able to work very productively, together but remotely, using a standard set of team collaboration and development tools. The second important ingredient is our DevOps culture and a relentless focus on continuous improvement. Our build as a service model was founded on our belief that collaboration and culture can have a dramatic influence on the products we create. Next up is modern technology and elasticity. This speaks to the solutions we create with our clients, the residual skills and discipline that allow our clients to work on those solutions themselves after our engagement ends. It also speaks to our ability to accelerate our clients' technical journeys at scale and on demand. Our build as a service model also requires passion for craft and highly skilled builders. Our AWS partnership, our frequent company-wide hackathons, and challenging engagements where our best can bring their best are all examples of harnessing that passion for craft. This resonates with our builders, who truly love technology and creating high-quality digital products. Last but not least is our focus on people and co-creation. We don't just build digital products, we build teams, processes, and culture, together with our clients, to create a long-lived delivery machine that's high-performing and sustainable, even after our engagement ends. With ARC, we relied on these 5 pillars as we embarked on an ambitious digital transformation, where serverless, supported by a DevOps culture, played a prominent role. Building serverless applications mean that our developers and yours can focus on new features instead of worrying about buying, building, operating, and maintaining infrastructure. This reduced overhead lets our teams reclaim time and energy that can be better spent on developing awesome products, inherently built for scale and reliability thanks to AWS. Most importantly, serverless allows us to challenge the misconception that building modern software is too difficult, too labor-intensive, or too expensive to be worthwhile. Reduced infrastructure overhead means more business value created more efficiently, and with extensibility built in from the start. Whether you're new to serverless or have been at it for some time, there are a few key enablers that can help ensure your success. With those key enablers in place, I'm confident you'll become serverless experts and champions as well. Central to serverless success is a DevOps culture. It's a culture that optimizes for team autonomy, information sharing, and continuous improvement. It's at the heart of the value proposition serverless offers. As important as culture is, and let me emphasize it's very important, it doesn't diminish the technical practices that are also essential to succeed with serverless. Let's start with configuration management, keeping infrastructure, configuration, and source code in version control, using an agreed upon branching strategy, and using an aggressive and proactive peer review process is essential for serverless applications. For those of you who don't have robust configuration management and automation in place today, it's a great first step towards serverless. Let's move on to infrastructure as code. Defining your infrastructure needs through version control software leads to reliable, repeatable, and predictable deployments across environments. With serverless, your infrastructure as code templates are greatly simplified, thanks to the behind-the-scenes infrastructure management serverless provides. To verify correctness of your application continuously, quality automation is essential. Test cases at all levels, captured as executable code, and test suites that are executed whenever a change is made will provide a high return on investment for you and your teams. Automated verification using continuous delivery pipelines can help further boost team efficiency and product quality. Fully automating the build, deployed, test, and release process to keep software in a releasable state is as important for serverless as it is for any application. You'll see that creating continuous delivery pipelines for serverless reduces complexity, since the units of work are more granular and more easily tested. With continuous delivery in place, a microservices architecture becomes more sustainable to develop. Once you've identified your service boundaries and responsibilities, you can quickly move on to delivering real business value, thanks to the efficiencies serverless offers. Even better, services built on serverless are built to be independently scalable and releasable. Some say microservices can be challenging to maintain, and they can be, but only if you haven't accounted for metrics and monitoring during product development. If you build operational visibility in from the start, your teams will gain velocity throughout development, in addition to being well positioned for operations. With a DevOps culture and supporting technical practices in place, the value proposition of serverless can be fully realized. What that means is an improved total cost of ownership, a lower cost of change, and the ability to deliver quickly whenever a new hypothesis or a new opportunity emerges. Working closely with ARC's senior technical leaders, including Chris and Joe, we developed a rich serverless pattern catalog for the transformation program. The purpose of the catalog was to capture proven serverless solutions for common business problems. We started the catalog with an initial set of patterns, and we've continually expanded and refined those patterns thanks to input and feedback from our product teams. One pattern from our library that I'd like to highlight is the data lake write-back pattern. The goal of this pattern is to enable low latency, high throughput services, while also keeping the latest and greatest information in a data lake to support on-demand reporting. The pattern starts on the left with an API endpoint protected by the Amazon API Gateway. The API functionality is implemented using an AWS Lambda function, which processes new transactions before writing them to Amazon DynamoDB. This completes the synchronous processing and allows fast response times from the service. Using DynamoDB streams, another AWS Lambda function, the writeback Lambda, is asynchronously notified when a new transaction is stored. The writeback Lambda supplements new transactions with additional metadata before writing it to an Amazon S3 bucket in the data lake. Now within the data lake, further processing ensues every time a file drops, thanks to event-driven processing. It's worth highlighting a few key points about the pattern and its implementation. First, consider the flexibility provided by the pattern. Imagine there's a need for a second downstream process to be notified anytime a new transaction is received. That process can use the same DynamoDB stream as our writeback Lambda. The easy addition of a new downstream service, event-driven, highlights the extensibility provided by the right combination of serverless services. In this case, the combination of processing, storage, and streams. Second, consider the security implications. With well-defined roles and responsibilities for each service, it allows us to limit access rights in a very granular and in a very auditable way. Remember that this pattern is entirely described by version-controlled source code, meaning an auditor can trace each version of the service across any environment. The serverless successes we've experienced at Arc rely on the teams, processes, and culture we've crafted together. Before we move on, I want to take a moment to recognize the amazing team members at Arc and at Slalom who have made it happen. Our work with Arc has been a true partnership, and Chris and Joe have been exceptional partners, and more importantly, exceptional leaders. With that, I'll hand it over to them to share their story.
I hope that you're doing well. Hi, I'm Chris Beagle. I joined ARC in November of 2018. In my first week that I started as an ARC employee, I was able to join the incredible Slalom team who had already started the engagement on a large transformation project. I came from a large retail company where I was responsible for architecture and infrastructure. When we started on this journey with Slalom, one of the things that we brought up was to discuss the function as a service as a first-class citizen in our platform, which many of you know as serverless. I was a bit nervous or hesitant at the start, and because with most IT technologies that come across that we get excited and then find out that there's scenarios that work or don't work. And so my first inclination was to focus on why it wouldn't work rather than focusing on why serverless and function as a service would deliver incredible value. I'm gonna hand it over to Joe.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I've been with ARC for a few years, and I have a perspective of maintaining our pre-transformation infrastructure as well as assisting in the implementation of our future state architecture. With this discussion, I hope to highlight some of the benefits ARC has had working with Slalom and AWS for this transformation.
Thank you, Joe. ARC was one of the best kept secrets, at least from my opinion, in the airline industry. I had not heard of ARC before coming there, so it was exciting to see the impact that they had, the strong relationships with the airlines. So ARC is responsible for the settlement processes for major airlines, GDSs, and travel agency, and we also provide analytics as a service. So as we came in and noticed that there were a lot of heavyweight processes that existed at ARC, and wanted to make sure that we had to bring in strong leadership to really make a difference. And as you can see with any project, that you have to have clear direction, and it's not just a technology change, it's also a process change. So the single objective of our company was to be able to come in and provide changes that our customers needed in months rather than years. And as many of you know, culture eats strategy. So our organization and our leadership that came in, they were very aware that if you wave a technology flag, it won't cause immediate transformation. It's a lot more complicated than that. And that's where they partnered with Slalom and their incredible wisdom and leadership to be able to come up with new ideas and new ways of working that were outside of the norm. And they brought it, so ARC brought in a CIO and then a CTO, and the CTO role was to back up his team members and also coach and guide them on the expectations and the outcomes. And then even the technical transformation that we had to go through, just by saying that, hey, we want new technology to look like this, there was a lot more in the back end that we had to do. And then we really had to start somewhere.
And thank you for that, Chris. And when I started with ARC, our ARC builds and maintains a very important settlement service, as well as creates some critical data products for our customers. And when I started, the thinking at the time was ARC will always be around. The too big to fail mindset was very apparent. Some of the issues we had were, although our systems were critical and robust, they were monolithic and very rigid, loads of manual processes and systems that were required a lot of care and feeding. Changes took multiple handoffs to other teams, and there were many delays in our processes. Rapid change was not something we were ready for. We had no cloud footprint, and serverless wasn't even heard of. But ARC was beginning to notice the changes happening in the settlement world and realized that we needed to pivot and change our outlook to adapt to the changes happening in our industry, such as NDC and one order.
Excellent. So as we started off on the large scale transformation, we blended Slalom team members for our discovery process. So Slalom helped establish with architecture and our leadership, blueprints and scaffolding that helped establish an architecture framework that the other team members could rinse and repeat. And it also enabled the decision-making process at a very granular and a very quick level. So things like meeting inventory of going on in transformation, it really helped remove the ambiguity. So we knew that a reflection back at previous ARC and why we needed transformation, the first thing that we needed to do was adjust velocity. And one of the observations we had was we needed to remove latency. And several of our processes and control prevented some of that velocity that our business needed. And you can draw parallels to Napoleon in 1806 at the Battle of Vienna. And I want to highlight two distinct points that they experienced that parallels with what we experienced. The first point was that in the Battle of Vienna, the Prussians still used the tactics some 50 years ago that Frederick the Great used, that made a lot of sense at the time. But as other countries grew and adapted, they also didn't change their processes, and this was something that we knew that we needed to do. The process that they had to do was they had to communicate up the ranks for every single change. So picture like a change approval process has to go all the way up the ranks for a leader and then all the way down, and that drew or added additional latency. The second point that you could observe from the Battle of Vienna was that the Prussians had a very long and lengthy supply chain, and what that meant was they didn't have the flexibility to adapt. What they noticed was whenever in the Battle of Vienna, they noticed that the French were able to flank quickly because they had backpacks. Their supply chain was very similar to the concept that we use for microservices. We moved away from the monolithic and tied into more of the independent autonomy, and very similar, Napoleon empowered his generals to be able to make earlier decisions in the field. And so that was one of his greatest strengths, and it paralleled a lot of the things that we needed to do. So with these decisions, we were effectively able to make quicker and more frequent decisions. And that's what I believe that the partnership with Slalom really help engage of when you are making these decisions using guiding principles, here's how to embellish some of those. And Joe, your thoughts on that as well?
Well, yeah, I just want to kind of highlight a few of the tactics that we kind of took through this. One was our leadership had a clear vision. right? And that was overly communicated across the organization. The leadership was in lockstep with each other about the vision, or at least that's the way they communicated it. So I bought into it. Two, there were early adopters, and these are the DevOps and serverless evangelists. This is where Slalom came in and assisted Arc. This helped our people learn quickly and to see the benefits of what serverless and DevOps could provide. And the third one was choosing a platform that could support the agile mindset we were adopting and allow our teams to build and deploy quickly, leveraging serverless. This is where AWS came in. AWS has been committed to our transformation from the beginning.
Then a very exciting step as we kind of walked into the solution. So with we started with demos, we started with architecture sessions and planning sessions, and we started to evolving these blueprints. We started dealing with the exceptions. We started dealing with the the scenarios that would work and the scenarios that wouldn't work, and we started documenting them. We started process where we took what were called a spike, and this was a full discovery of, hey, I don't even know where I'm starting with. What do I need to know about a product? So that would document so that we could pay it forward for other teams. And as you see this evolution of processes and strategy and design started creating a ripe opportunity for our teams, our internal teams, to take what blueprints that were provided with Slalom's guidance and input, and they went without any training, without a lot of experience, and started to embark on a very similar journey that was microservices, serverless first, and we really saw a lot of benefits from the teams. Obviously, they didn't know everything that they needed to do, but they were able to figure out, and that was really exciting to see the evolution and the consulting and leadership guidance that we were able to see with ARC. So they really, with Slalom, they were really able to provide an incredible, hey, cause and effect, make sure that we're chasing the right things. Any input from you, Joe?
Yeah, just a few things here. One of the key things I got out of it as we were building the solution was the emphasis on some guiding principles to govern our transformation, right? So one of the first ones was serverless first. So we had this approach that any of our custom applications, that's where we would start. We would start with serverless. The processing of data through our data lake. This is, the left to right processing of our data. We were utilizing like bucket event triggers, SNS topics, coordinated with step functions, and Fargate for data processing. We were leveraging the API gateway. So all these components, all these serverless components kind of came into the way that we were building our applications. And that was, that came about because of this principle first of serverless first, right? Kind of goes along with that is another one, event-driven, data-driven architecture. No more waiting on timings or schedules to kick off processes, using the event notification mechanisms, step functions that notify an SNS topic, so that multiple downstream subscribers can begin their processing, and more of like a fan-out methodology. And another principle that we have is team autonomy. We started small teams, gave them their own AWS accounts so that they could work and not impact other teams. Less handoffs to other teams, more DevOps. The team then has ownership of what they've created. The teams could manage their build environments. We use Jenkins as a build master, and then leverage Fargate in our Jenkins. So there's just a few examples of some of these guiding principles that we had that helped kind of drive our transformation.
That's it. That's exciting. As we've progressed, laying the foundation of structure and process and support with leaderships, you can kind of see as we evolve. We'll get into an example too, and I'll also hand it off to Joe to highlight some of the execution results, but I can't begin to compliment on how the partnership with Slalom has provided us with the ability to retain ground with the processes and structure and control. And AWS provide us with an incredible platform to accelerate delivery. Handing over to you, Joe.
Yeah, so for me, when I look at results, really it comes down to just a couple things. So one of the key ones is how quickly we can get a product out the door, right? As things progressed, we were building patterns as well as seeing patterns emerge with our teams. Teams began to leverage these patterns and code and the code from these other teams that had already been created. This gave us the ability to go from like 0 to 80% complete in the fraction of the time it took the first team. We're now seeing teams that are going from conception to production readiness of a product in anywhere from 3 months to 30 days. This is a huge improvement over where we were just a few years ago.
So this is one of the examples that we started with one of our settlement processes. We had obviously a large set of files that came in, 2.5 gigs with 350 records. And we started with first on the project because we did want a greenfield and leverage a lot of the features that AWS really brought to bear in taking a cloud native first mindset. So we came from a very traditional model where we had a centralized database, and as James mentioned earlier, that we've tried to reduce the blast radius, and that's the same thing that we wanted to do here. So the 2.5 gig files, 350 records, and then as you see, it's highlighted in bullet 3, determine the size of chunks sent to a queue. And then this parallel architecture or distributed architecture was something that we definitely had to rely upon Slalom's leadership on how to be able to solve this. This was a new concept for us to have a distributed. Many of you know that managed corporate data centers, you don't have all of the servers at your disposal to be able to say, hey, how big is this? And so it was very impressive to watch. So that we were able to spin up 10 parallel processes, processing 35,000 records apiece, which seems very, I mean, that actually seems very impressive at how we were able to divide and conquer within 2 minutes of total processing time. And this is one simple example of how we've moved serverless to a first-class citizen in our environment. And I touched earlier about my nervousness and reservation, and also want to highlight that how I've been pleasantly surprised. So for example, the serverless infrastructure didn't require a lot of management or planning. If I was wanting to spin up another 10 servers or processes, I would have to have multiple change controls, have to have multiple people engage, have to have multiple things that drove up latency. And that latency was removed by removing a lot of the decision making that had to that really didn't help our bottom line. So we were able to dramatically accelerate, as Joe highlighted. And I believe that all of you listening will be incredibly impressed at how serverless allows you to focus on what is important. And as you can see through our journey, this provided a much needed acceleration in velocity to deliver outcomes and allow us to optimize our resources and processes to increase our top line rather than chasing the bottom line. With Slalom's leadership and the support from our leadership and an incredible platform to be able to execute delivery faster than other platforms, I think you will be excited. Now handing it over to Santiago.
Thank you, Chris and Joe, for sharing the exciting outcomes of ARC. We're now going to transition to our live Q&A. So as a reminder, you will be able to submit any written questions through the questions panel. In the event that we're not able to answer any some of your questions today, we will follow up with everyone individually via email. So to get started, we have a question here. So I think this will be a good one for to start off with James here. So you talked a lot about cross-functional product teams. What's the composition of a standard team, and what are the key roles?
Sure. Yeah. Good question. And then I'd pass it over to Chris and Joe as well for the ARC take. So from the Slalom side, we structure the discovery process similar to the process that Chris touched on that we executed with settlement, with sort of 3 key roles in place, and the roles vary depending on kind of the focus of the product itself. But in the case of settlement, we started with a solution owner, who I'll talk more about in a second, a solution architect, an experienced designer, and a quality automation architect. And the idea behind that is that for settlement, we knew that quality was going to be important, so we wanted to kind of lead with that. We knew that user experience, the experience design, the overall sort of landscape ecosystem of settlement users was something we wanted to account for up front. We have our solution architect kind of leading the way on architecture, technical decisions, and choices. And then our solution owner role is kind of the one who drives the backlog, acting sort of as a scrum master, project manager, and technical BA to get into the details to make sure we have a full understanding of scope, of estimate in terms of the amount of work that it would take. And when we then move from discovery into delivery, we add that engineering capacity, right? So we have data engineers, software engineers, quality engineers, and automation engineers, our DevOps and cloud group, to make sure that we have those key ingredients that I mentioned earlier from the start, right? So our first sprints typically focus on building out that continuous delivery pipeline, a very rough version of it, but enough so that we know that any change that we make is going through several environments and several types of tests. And that allows us to really get that acceleration from the very beginning, from our first sprint. And it's at that point that we can really kind of drive that business value forward, thanks again to a lot of the benefits that serverless offers, and allow us to really show business outcomes 1, 2, 3 sprints ahead, in a pretty consistent way. So that's kind of how we're set up. And I guess Chris and Joe, from your side, how are you set up on the Arc side, and how is it similar or different than what I described?
The typical product team would have a solutions architect, a product owner, could have, depending on the type of offering, it could have, we typically try to limit no more than 10 people on a team so that they could focus on delivery. There are a couple of surprises or things that we had to get in front of. So the first thing was the solutions architect. In the past, if they would have came from the data world or the development world, we also had to make them aware that, hey, you own all technology, even outside of your lane. So this became a growth opportunity for us in our organization. So, and believe that on the technology side, the most critical role is the solutions architect. The data engineers, because we are a data company first, so the data engineers, data ops engineers to deal with making sure that we curate the correct data and all the processes are in place. I think the concepts and constructs, and as we built out the framework, that was a bit of it was a change in mindset. We came from a very, very structured, this is your lane, don't step outside your lane. And so one of the things to make sure that you enable that and you support that from a leadership perspective. Another, you had mentioned the UI UX, and we're also trying to put some scaffolding out so that we can enable the teams to go far and use some of the guiding principles. And then whenever they need to, bring in a UI person that we and the development team or the pod or the Scrum team that has already developed an outcome could at least be aligned. And then that UI person, we can span them across multiple teams. So we have SA, we have a product owner, we have, it could be 1 or 2 SQE resources, up to 4, and the blend of software engineering versus data engineering, depends on the product. We would also entrench a site reliability engineer, and this is something that we just started as we went live, 90 days prior to go live. And we know that we'll have to adjust that over time, but we want the ops team to start solving some of the initial to create kind of an autonomous flow, if you will.
Great. Perfect. So there's a follow-up question here. How many non-slalom teams, and this is to Chris and Joe, how many non-slalom teams do you have right now that are using serverless technologies?
So we have, I believe, 3 different teams, non-slalom teams that are using serverless technology. One, it's first class citizen. Another one, they're using it some of the data processing pipelines. And as we're going through the architecture reviews, we would occasionally see, okay, we have an EC2 instance. Okay, well, our guiding principle is function as a service first. Can we look at moving this to a function, a serverless architecture? So that's something that we'll have to keep guiding through, but I think the teams continue to be excited to use serverless as well.
Great.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's starting to permeate, right, across the organization.
Yeah,
Correct.
absolutely. We have another team as well that's basically has that kind of a legacy architecture. We're using EC2 instances. We're using store-bought applications, and we've got a new architecture to move that entire team in, to a serverless pattern. So serverless architecture, that's on the roadmap here for this year, actually.
Great, perfect. We have another question here from our listeners, and this is I think it's to Slalom directly. Yeah. So, what was the most challenging task for Slalom to help Arc modernize their infrastructure? So this to you, James.
Most challenging. That's a good one. I think there wasn't any single thing. I think it's just a matter of the amount of work, setting up for the webinar, kind of going back a year and a half ago and thinking through, we've done a lot. As a group, it's kind of phenomenal to think back to all the different steps that we went through, and to hear, the story today kind of brings it full circle for me. I think it's really the hardest thing is just sticking with it, right? It's understanding that there are some challenges along the way, that there are those key critical enablers that do take time to get in place. The continuous delivery pipeline, the quality automation built in, the ability to build in metrics and monitoring from the start. And, sometimes it's perfect, sometimes it's not, but it's working through those times it's not in a way that is collaborative, that's supportive. And, I think that's really the key, is just the resilience to really follow a vision. And I think that's the thing that's impressed me most about working with the ARC team, is that, as Chris and Joe kind of highlighted, the leadership vision of what ARC is moving to, it's there, it's sort of focused, and it's supportive. And I think that's really the key, is that it enables both teams, the ARC team and the Slalom team, to work together towards that vision, because we know there's support there to do it, and we know that there isn't sort of any sort of wavering in that direction. Like, we know that this is happening, and we're going to do our best to make it happen. So I think that the underlying message, I guess, is that it's the decision to take this approach to modernize, and the ability to stick with it, that's really been impressive. And I think that's the key. And to be perfectly honest, I've seen other clients struggle with that decision making, right, where they make the decision, they try it for a couple months, and then they change direction. It's the ability to stick with it that's really helped to allow us to do what we've done over the last 18 months.
Can I also follow up too?
Absolutely, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the receiving end too is, we had tried and true experiences that we knew, and Slalom came in with a different mindset. So the thing that I encourage each of you, right, is whenever you do come in with a thought leader like Slalom, be open to ideas, be open to see them play out. And if you read it to what James was saying, you can't take a knee-jerk reaction. You have to stay the course. That even the approach that we're taking is right. So, enable, from a leadership perspective, allow the difficult conversations to happen, allow the coaching, allow the guidance, allow the collaboration, make decisions quickly, right, and recover quickly. So, and that's another cultural thing that we had to make sure that, hey, you will be supported. And as our team start, feeling that, hey, I can make this decision and I can fail and recover from it, it created an excitement and an energy. And I think the cause and effect is very impressive. But I also want to share that on the other side, if you have a Slalom that is guiding you, be open, be willing to try, right? And don't get in the caveat where you poison the well and you see one bad example and say, okay, well, let's look at this. Let's do an autopsy on it. Not necessarily say that, hey, it's time to cut bait and move on.
Perfect. Yeah. Now there's another question here. I think a good kind of follow up here for ARC as well. Is the new solution more cost effective than the old monolithic system? And if yes, how much cheaper?
Well, so I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit giddy. When we were doing that performance test, and we ran it several times, the thing that I would socialize through the organization is how much we were spending for our testing and development, and obviously running through a lot. It was sub $1,000 when we were doing our testing. I've never seen anything like it. But if you think about the dynamics of it, I'm sorry, I'm quite speechless to see how exciting the future is going to be for us, because yes, we're going to use exactly the capacity that we need. And there won't be this big capital planning event that we had to do. Okay, hey, I need to buy the whole apartment complex to live in an apartment. And many of you that own corporate data centers know that challenge, that, hey, I have a switch luxury tax. And really, AWS kind of demystified a lot of that. And that's an exciting question, because it generates a lot of excitement in our organization at the potential that just how cost effective that it can be.
And
Great.
to jump in on that, Chris, just for a second too, there's, oftentimes people look at run cost. What does it cost to run? And that's definitely a contributing factor to the total cost of ownership. But the pieces that are important to look at too are the cost to build it and the cost to change it once it's built. And I think those two factors are often, when we get into sort of price comparisons, where it's hard to quantify the older version, right? How long did it take to build the original system? Well, it took 20 years. So, let's figure that out. And then how long does it take to make a simple change in that system? Well, now it takes lots of time and lots of planning and lots of sort of decision making, all of which cost money. Every meeting that's there, to have decisions about what we do or don't do from a feature perspective and a time and cost perspective, that's taking away focus on building the next feature, building the next product. And so what I think, we've seen across the teams that we've been working with is the total cost of ownership is lower, because the speed to get new products out the door, as Joe mentioned, now we're talking, weeks, when before we were talking months. That changes the cost equation pretty significantly. So it's not just about the run cost, it's really that total cost of ownership from build to change to operating.
Yeah, and to highlight exactly what you're saying, the enablement, AWS really helps you to get in. Hey, can I even figure out if this works? I know in corporate planning, to your point, James, that there's so much planning for the prep work just to say, hey, can we do the project? And we have to buy all this infrastructure ahead of time. And it just makes it so much easier that we can focus on the bottom line or the top line.
Perfect. Yeah. There's another question that's come in here. Says you talked about the testing automation. I think, James, this is something you talked about in some of the slides that you had on there. Could you please describe how that automation was plugged into the pipeline for continuous deployment?
Yes. So we had selected, so when we first aligned on our principles and guiding principles, we said that, hey, we want an automation first testing approach. So we looked at different products and the language selection. So we decided to embrace Node and TypeScript, and that was with Slalom's input, and it made so much sense of what we were doing. So the automation framework that we selected initially was artillery. And so the test cases that we had and for our settlement processes use artillery to be able to generate the test. Now, what we want to do is be able to pivot later and be able to perform load tests based off of that in our CI/CD pipeline, take the outputs, and then it became, okay, well, we will need to adjust. But we use a product that fit more on the JavaScript framework tied to Node, artillery. We also use for some of the API testing internally, we use Cucumber because of the Gherkins language, and we can take the Gherkins language and have somebody in the business to say, hey, does this make sense to you? And they can read it. Oh, okay, yeah, it makes sense of how we're testing it.
Perfect.
In terms of, just quickly, in terms of getting that into the pipeline, there are multiple stages, right? So in that build stage, that's where we're hitting our unit and component tests. As we deploy into different environments progressively, we have functional acceptance, non-functional acceptance, and then we do exploratory manual and user acceptance testing in separate environments. So this concept of an environment vending machine, where you can basically launch environments either programmatically, from your desktop or from the pipeline, is really a powerful thing, and that enables us to test all those different ways before something is ready to be sent to production.
I forgot to highlight that. That is incredible. That's kind of the Oprah version. You get an environment, you get an environment, you get an environment. And because of that, if you think about it, the number one thing that we were chasing with the program was velocity. And Slalom's team and one of the engineers, DevOps Dave, was able to build an environmental vending machine that will allow us to, if we need 10 people to test in an environment, they can create their own from end to end, stand it up, and then destroy it after it's done. That really, really will help long-term with velocity.